Welcome to Amazing Dinosaurs. This is a collection of Jurassic World land dinosaurs versus sky dinosaurs versus ocean dinosaurs. First, we're gonna go with one of the massive ocean dinosaurs. This is the ocean protector Mosasaurus. This is the new version of the Mosasaurus compared to the older one back here that we'll see shortly. It's got a darker blue coloring on the skin with a light underbelly, and you can move the jaw and the fins and the tail. Next, we're gonna grab a land dinosaur. This is the new Epic Evolution Allosaurus figure. It has the classic coloring like many of the Allosauruses with the brown on the sides and the underbelly and then the dark blue on the top. It's got this hidden button on its tail here to activate its spikes that come out of its back. And there's a little dial on its back for the chomping action. Those are some really cool teeth too. Next, we're gonna grab a sky dinosaur. This is a pteranodon dinosaur, and this I believe is a basic figure, so the coloring and texturing is a bit more simple than the other figures, but you can still move its wings and adjust its head and open and close its mouth. Now it's time for another ocean dinosaur. Here is the older version of the Mosasaurus. As you can see, it has lighter coloring compared to the newer version, plus it has some interesting coloring right along its back right there, a bit of the lighter blue. And like the other Mosasaurus figure, you can open and close its jaw, you can move its fins, but on this older figure, you actually can't move the tail at all. But other than that, they're pretty identical, other than the coloring too. Now it's time for another land dinosaur. This is a pretty special figure, and I think pretty hard to find nowadays. This is the Legacy Collection Spinosaurus dinosaur figure. It's one of the few Spinosaurus figures that comes in this dark green coloring with the white and red striping on its spine. And you can move its arms, its legs, and its tail. You can adjust the neck as well, and of course there is a chomping action. Now it's time for another sky dinosaur. This is actually a species that I'm not familiar with. It's an older Jurassic World figure. I believe it's from the first Jurassic World movie, and it looks pretty unique, especially with this crazy red and blue coloring along with the yellow on its face. And on this figure, you can squeeze the legs to flap the wings up and down. Plus, there is a battle damage button right on its back that you can press as well. Next up from the ocean dinosaurs is this dinosaur with a super long neck. This is the Allosaurus. It's got those aquatic colors with that light blue coloring and some lighter along its back and on its tail. You can adjust the fins on this ocean dinosaur, plus there are two buttons on its back. One makes its head swing to the side and open its mouth, and the other button moves its head downwards and opens its mouth too. I've got another huge land dinosaur here. This is the super popular Indominus Rex, and actually this figure is from the Dino Trackers series. So it's a bit smaller compared to many of the other Indominus Rexes that I have, but you can use the tail to move its head around and open and close its jaw. Let's go for another land dinosaur. Here I've got a Tyrannosaurus Rex figure, and this one is the battle damage edition that you can see right on the side here. And you can activate and hide the battle damage by pressing this button on the top right here. Just like that, it almost completely disappears. And you can move the arms, the legs, the tail, and you can adjust the neck as well, although there is no button for chomping the jaw. Next up is a sky dinosaur, and this species is called the Quetzalcoatlus. You may remember this dinosaur from the Jurassic World Dominion movie when it attacked the plane as they were flying to the island. And it has foldable wings, so you can expand the wings fully. It has a button on its back for flapping the wings, and another button on its back for activating the chomping action. Let's do a few more sky dinosaurs here. I've got two more pteranodons, each with unique coloring. This first one has the orange wings with the brown body and the yellow detailing right along its head, and it also has that button for flapping its wings and for chomping its jaw. And the other pteranodon here also has some orangish yellow wings, but it has some detailing that looks like kind of green tan coloring along the bottom of its wings, and its whole body is not that brown color, but it rather fades from this orange up to the brown and then that dark red detailing along its head. I definitely like the coloring design of this one more, but sadly it only has one button, and that button is for flapping the wings. Next up is a smaller aquatic dinosaur. This one is called the Tanystropheus. Just like the Allosaurus that we saw earlier though, it has a super long neck, and it also has that aquatic coloring with the darker blue on its body and then the lighter blue up to its face. And you can move all the legs on this figure, plus you can move the tail up and down to swing its head up and down as well. Next up for the land dinosaurs is the Endoraptor. This specific Endoraptor figure is from the Dino Tracker series, so it's one of the newer ones, and it's really cool because it has this reflective blue coloring over its entire body while still having the iconic gold stripe down its side. And you can adjust the legs, the tail, and actually the arms activate a chomping action on this figure. Plus, there is an additional button on its back for more chomping and sound effects. Next up is a Sky Dinosaur. This one is a Dimorphodon, and I believe it's from the Amber collection because it's quite a bit more detailed with its coloring and with its posability. A really cool part is that its wings are actually not outstretched, but it's actually in this walking position with its wings upright. And you can adjust the jaw, the neck, you can move the arms around, as well as the back legs and the tail too. Here is another Sky Dinosaur, and this one is called the Zungarapteris. It is quite a unique looking Sky Dinosaur. It's got the bright yellow body with the brown that goes up to its head, and it actually looks like it has feather texturing all over its body, which you don't see on the Pteranodons, I think. Plus, check out the shape of its head as well. It kind of curves upward, and it has this huge ridge on the top of its head. Next up is an aquatic dinosaur. This is another Mosasaurus figure, but it's a whole lot smaller than the ones I showed you earlier. And this figure is actually a little bit older than the other ones. It's from the first Jurassic World movie, and it's got some battle damage on the side here that you can open and close, and you can move the fins, and the tail used to activate a chomping action in this figure. Sadly, it's broken, so it no longer does that. Back to the land dinosaurs, I've got a Baryonyx figure here with the classic brown coloring on the sides and underbelly, and then the darker blue detailing along the top of its body. Plus, as a special little feature on this, it's got the reflective blue coloring on the top of its face and a little bit on the side too. And there's a single action button on its back for a chomping action. Let's check out these two Sky Dinosaurs next. I believe they're both Pteranodon figures, but they look quite a bit different. And this one is the older version, so we'll start with this one. It's also quite a bit smaller than the other one I just showed you. It's got this green-gray coloring over most of its body with the purple detailing on its wings and on its head. It's got a hidden battle damage right here on the bottom of its belly, which is pretty unusual. And because this figure's so old, the wing flapping ability doesn't work anymore. But it's still a pretty unique figure. And here is the other Pteranodon figure that I showed you. This one is that dark orange color. It looks like it has some lighter detailing along the tips of its wings and a brighter orange right along the top of its head. And this figure is a basic figure, so it has no button to activate wing flapping or a chomping action either. But you can still move its head around and open and close its mouth. Next up is the ocean dinosaurs, and this next figure is called the Plesiosaurus. Now this one's a bit different because it doesn't have an all blue body, but rather it has this tan coloring along the sides and underbelly, and then the dark blue along the top all the way up to the head. And there's a single action button on its back to flap the flippers. This next land dinosaur is called the Siatsmikararum, and it is a very unique and kind of crazy looking dinosaur. First off, it's got this super bright coloring with the orange on most of its body and then the dark blue along the top of its back all the way up to its head. It's got a bunch of crazy spikes along its back and the top of its head. And my favorite part of all is this unique set of teeth. When you close its mouth, you can see that this huge tooth right there fits in between the teeth on the top. And this figure has an action where you can move the tail to control the head and to chomp the jaw too. Here are the next Sky Dinosaurs. Both of these I believe are Dimorphodon dinosaurs, and we'll start with this gray and purple one here. It looks like its entire body is that gray coloring, so not a whole lot going on with the coloring, but it does have this nice purple detailing along the bottom side of its wings. But let's compare that with this super bright version right here. It's got this bright red over most of its body. You can see a little bit of dark brown that's on its back and leads up to its head, but the coolest part here is the underside of its wings. Check out that bright orange and that yellow too. Next up for the aquatic dinosaurs is another Mosasaurus, but this one is a whole lot different. This is actually from the Gujitsu series. So most of its body is super stretchy and filled with liquid, and when you squeeze it, you can actually reveal what's inside, which looks like a bunch of fish bones. And the only hard plastic part of this dinosaur is its head, which you can actually open up as well. This dinosaur is called the Sinotyrannus dinosaur, and it is a land dinosaur. This figure is from the Dino Tracker series, and it's got this dark green coloring with a bit of lighter green along the front of its body. But the coolest part is this bright red along its face and way along the back of its tail. And this figure has 2 buttons on its back. The first activates the tail swinging action, and the second activates the jaw chomping action. For the Sky Dinosaurs, I've got another pair here. Both of them are Dimorphodon figures, but this larger one here is actually an older figure, I believe, from the first Jurassic World movie. This figure has a bit of camouflage coloring going on with the dark brown, some of the yellow, and then the green over its whole body. And it's got a battle damage button on its back, which sadly doesn't work anymore, but the wing flapping action on this figure still does. So you can squeeze the legs and it moves its wings up and down, as well as chomps the jaw. Now compare that to a newer version of the Dimorphodon figure here, and I believe this one is actually from the Amber collection. So it's a bit smaller and it has some different coloring. It's kind of a gray-blue coloring along most of its back, and then the wings fade into this yellow coloring, but the underside of the wings are super bright. It's like yellow, orange, and it's got those red veins everywhere. And this Dimorphodon figure is super posable too. You can adjust the jaw, the head, the wings. You can even twist the torso back and forth, as well as the legs and the tail. For the ocean dinosaurs, I've got my smallest figures yet. Both of these figures are the Mosasaurus dinosaur in one of its smallest forms. Now the coloring's pretty basic on this, so most of it is this soft blue coloring with a little bit of darker blue along the top. Although I do have to say the texturing that they did with all the ridges and bumps, and especially the spikes on its tail, that's pretty cool, and you can even open and close its mouth too. This land dinosaur, I'm sure you know, is the Therizinosaurus dinosaur. It is a pretty massive figure. It's got the feather texturing all over its body, and it looks like it has 4 different colors on its body. It's got this dark blue, it's got this greenish color for its feet and the front of its neck and some of its head, as well as the white, and then the bright red that runs along its back all the way up to its head. It's got those huge claws on its front hands too, and you can move the tail to twist the torso back and forth, and there is a chomping action too. Now it's time for some more Sky Dinosaurs. I've got quite a few more Pteranodons, and I'm pretty sure Pteranodons are some of the most produced Sky Dinosaurs by the Jurassic World series. This first Pteranodon has the brown coloring with the green along its wings. It has the expandable wings, and it's actually quite large. And it's got 2 actions on its back. One activates the wing flapping, and it's actually got sound effects too, which is pretty unusual. And then it has a second button for chomping the jaw. Then there's this equally sized Pteranodon here, but with totally different coloring. It's got the dark blue body, and then it has this dark red coloring along its wings with the lighter detailing right in the middle. And this one has a single action button on its back for the wing flapping. And it looks like this one has a speaker for sound effects, although sadly it doesn't work on this figure anymore. And I think these 2 are the final 2 Pteranodons of this collection. This first one here is a darker green color. It's got the bright yellow-green detailing along its wings, and the texturing on these wings is quite interesting too. There's tons of stripes running back and forth. And it has a single action button on its back for flapping the wings, and you can manually open and close the jaw. And then there's this other Pteranodon figure, which is pretty similar aside from the coloring. It's got the gray coloring over its whole body with a little bit of purple detailing along its wings and on its head and its feet. And once again, it has the single action button for flapping the wings. And now here is our final aquatic dinosaur. This is another Plesiosaurus. I think this one is a more recent version of the one that we saw earlier. But this one definitely has some more aquatic coloring. It's got the lighter underbelly and then the dark blue body over everywhere else basically. And you can manually open and close the jaw as well as turn its head side to side. And there's a single action button on its back for moving its fins. And here is our final land dinosaur. This is the Pentaceratops. It looks quite a bit like a Triceratops with the frill in the front and that it's standing on 4 legs, but it's got a much larger frill and I think a lot more horns than the Triceratops does. Plus there are 2 action buttons. The first swings its head up and down in a huge stabbing action, and the second swings its torso side to side. And here's our final Sky Dinosaur. This little dinosaur is called the Rhamphorhynchus. It has the brighter colored wings. It's kind of a green-yellow coloring with some interesting detailing and texturing, and its body is a darker green coloring. And there is no action button on this figure, but you can manually open the mouth and move the head up and down. You can move the wings manually as well, and you can move the back legs too. First up, we've got a ginormous Spinosaurus figure. This is the Camp Cretaceous Spinosaurus with the brown body and red along its spine and face, and it's got the action button on its head for the chomping and roaring. Next up, we've got the Terran T-Rex. This T-Rex has a really cool ability. When you press down on this button, it does a tearing action. Look at that, it's like tearing away some meat. That's really cool. And it comes with a second action button to swing the tail. Next up, we've got a big old Therizinosaurus figure, just like in the Jurassic World Dominion movie. It's got the red stripe down its back all the way to the top of its head, and this figure has some special features as well. There is a button on its tail to activate the jaw and the neck, and you can use the tail to swivel the torso back and forth. Plus, check out those huge claws. Next dinosaur is the Stomp and Escape T-Rex. This figure has a light brown body with gray detailing. It has one button on the top of its back for the roaring and chomping. And the tail, when you twist it, stomps its feet. Some pretty cool sound effects that come with it too. Next up, we've got a big old Carnotaurus figure. This has a light red or orange coloring along most of its body. It's got the gray underbelly and the brown top, and tons of little bumps along its back, as well as the two horns on the top of its head. And this figure has an action button for the chomping, and you can use the tail to move the head around too. Here's another T-Rex that I bought just recently. This is the new Extreme Battle Damage T-Rex. Check it out, there's a button on its back that you can use to activate the battle damage on the side. That's pretty cool. And the rest of the figure is fully posable as well. Here is another ginormous T-Rex in the back. This one is camo colored, and I believe it's custom colored. That was done a long time ago. And this figure has a few actions that you can do with the tail. You can move the tail up, and it does a roaring pose. And you can move the tail down, and it does a chomping action. This dinosaur is a Baryonyx. It's got the light green coloring and the light brown and dark brown along the top. And it's got an action button on its back for the chomping. Right over here is an Albertosaurus. This figure is medium sized. It's got the dark green coloring along its body and that red maroon color all the way along the top of its head. And this Albertosaurus actually has the battle damage, both on its leg and the battle damage that you can open and close on its side. And you can even bring the rib cage up and down to reveal the stomach inside. Here is another Baryonyx figure. This one is light gray with blue and light green coloring and a little bit of white along the side. And it has the slide lever action to activate the roaring sound effects and the jaw too. Here's another Baryonyx figure. This one has light green coloring along with some darker green along the top and on its legs, and the darker brown along its neck and the top of its head too. This Baryonyx figure also has the slide lever action that you can use for the sound effects and the chomping. This is the Majingasaurus figure. It's a bit smaller. It's got the dark green coloring with the yellow and bright blue detailing along the sides. It has teeny tiny arms that are adjustable, and you can use the tail to move the neck and head around. Let's see what we got next up. This is a Carcharodontosaurus figure. It has the dark blue coloring with the yellow and brown detailing along the top. The arms, legs, and tail are fully adjustable, and there's a button on its back for the chomping. Here is a Cryolophosaurus figure. This one has some really cool crowning along the top of its head in that bright orange color, while the rest of its body is yellow and brown along the top. With this figure, you can use the tail to control the head as well. Here is another Baryonyx figure. This one has some bright orange coloring right along the top of its head though. And of course, it's got the button on its back to activate the jaw. Next up, we've got a dark red Carnotaurus figure. This dinosaur has the light underbelly and some purple detailing along the top of its body. And it is very textured. You can see those bumps and ridges all over everywhere. And of course, it's got the huge horns at the top of its head, plus an action button to activate the chomping. Next up, we've got a super bright yellow Suchomimus figure. This dinosaur has the brown detailing along the top. It's got that spine all the way from its head, all the way down almost to the end of its tail. And this figure has two action buttons. The first is for the jaw and the chomping, and the second action button activates the tail for swinging around. This dinosaur is a Metriacanthosaurus. It's a bit smaller than the other figures. It's got the dark red coloring with some darker detailing along the top, and the bright yellow-orange coloring right along its head. And of course, it's got an action button on its back to activate the jaw. I've got another Suchomimus figure. This one is a dark blue color with some bright yellow detailing along the top and along that spine that goes all the way to its tail. These Suchomimuses have really long and narrow snouts, still full of teeth though, and there is an action button on its back to activate the chomping. Next up is another Carcharodontosaurus figure. This one is tan in color with the brown and orange detailing along the top, and it's got all these little spikes right along its spine, running all the way down to the tail. That's pretty interesting. And this figure has an action button that activates the jaw once again. That's pretty cool. Here we've got an Allosaurus figure with the light tan coloring along the underbelly and the sides, and the darker blue along the top of its back all the way to the top of its head. This figure also has the slide lever action for a bunch of different sound effects and chomping actions. Over here we've got a big Dilophosaurus figure in the bright red coloring along with the green, brown, and red along its frills, and that super bright yellow crown on the top of its head too. This figure is pretty basic though, so it doesn't have any action buttons, but you can still move the arms, the legs, and the tail, as well as move the frills back and forth. Here is a basic Spinosaurus figure. This one is a lot smaller than the Spinosaurus that we saw at the beginning of this video, and this one has the dark green coloring, but still has the iconic red spine and the red around the eyes as well. And on this figure, you can't open and close the jaw, but you can just move the arms, the legs, and the tail. Next up, we've got a huge Carnotaurus figure. This one has some darker red, basically brown coloring along the side. It has a dark gray underbelly and the black along the top. And this figure has a few actions too. The tail actually controls the head, so you can swing that around and up and down, and there's a button on the tail to activate the jaw too. Here is another Cryolophosaurus figure. This one is a dark blue color. It's got the light underbelly and some white detailing on the sides, and then a bunch of red along its back and on the crown on the top of its head too. And just like the other one that we saw, you can use the tail to control the neck. Here is the Baryonyx from the Hammond collection. This Baryonyx is way more adjustable than a lot of figures that you'll see in here. Check that out. You can move its elbows and its arms, all over on its legs. It's pretty realistic with its movement, and it's got a bit more texturing than a lot of the other Baryonyx figures that I have. Looks like we've got some mini Dilophosaurus figures in here. This first one is a soft purple color, and it's got some yellow, orange, and red on its frills. Looking pretty scary. And I've also got this soft green Dilophosaurus that's also got some orange and some yellow on it. And this one actually has an action that when you move the tail, it springs the frills up. That's really cool. Here is the Irritator figure. Most of this figure is dark brown. It's got a little bit of the light underbelly, and it's got some cool dark blue and light blue detailing all along its spine, all the way to the top of its head. And check out that super long mouth with all those teeth. All right, looks like we got another giant Dilophosaurus figure in here. This one is green and has red frills and the red crown. And just like the other one, you can open and close the frills, as well as move the arms, legs, and the tail too. Next up, I believe that this is the Roarivore Allosaurus. This dinosaur is gray all along its body and has the yellow detailing right along the top of its body, all the way to the tip of its head. Here is another Metriacanthosaurus figure. This one is a dark mustard yellow along most of its body and underbelly, and it's got that dark green detailing along the top of its back all the way to its head. And it has an action button on its back for chomping the jaw. We've got another Albertosaurus figure in here. This one does not have the battle damage on its side though. It's got the bright orange detailing on its side all the way up to its eyes, while the rest of its body is a dark green color. This figure has an action where you can move the tail to control the head, as well as press the button on its tail to activate the jaw too. Check it out, another Baryonyx figure. This one has the bright reflective blue coloring on the top of its head, while the rest of its body is a soft brown color and a dark gray blue detailing along the top. And it's got the action button on its back for the jaw. Looks like we've got a few Monolophosaurus figures in here as well. This first one is a brown color with gray detailing, and it's pretty adjustable. It's a pretty small figure though. This other Monolophosaurus figure actually has some battle damage on the side that you can open and close, and is fairly adjustable as well. And this final one is a dark green color, has some yellow detailing and that bright red detailing, and check out those green eyes too. And this figure actually has an action button. When you move the tail, it chomps its jaw open and closed. Last of all, we've got a Gallimimus figure. This dinosaur is a soft brown color and it has some darker brown striping along the top, and you can move its head up and down as well as its other limbs too. Let's get started with the largest quadrupedal that I have, which is this huge Dreadnoughtus figure. This dinosaur has the blue with the tan striping, and it has one of the longest necks out of any of my figures. So let's set this figure on the very left because this is my largest dinosaur. Next up in size is one of these Brachiosaurus figures. Let's first choose this one right here. It's got the classic brown coloring, and you can move its legs, its neck, and you can even open and close its mouth. Let's move this Brachiosaurus right next to the Dreadnoughtus. Check out that size difference between these two. Next up, we've got another Brachiosaurus figure, but this one is newer. This one is part of the Jurassic World Dominion collection. Now, its body shape is pretty much the same as this one right here, but you'll notice that it has some different coloring, and the best part of all is that it has this reflective blue coloring along its face. Next up in size, we've got this huge Apatosaurus figure. This dinosaur is quite a bit smaller than the Brachiosaurus figures, but it's still quite large. It has the green with the light green striping, and I'm sure you recognize this dinosaur from the Jurassic World Dominion movie. Let's keep going. I think the next biggest in size is this Amargosaurus figure. I think this figure's pretty old and that they don't make it anymore, but it's really cool because it has these two huge spines running down its neck and two action buttons, one to move the neck up and down and one to swing the tail back and forth. All right, let's set this down right next to the Apatosaurus. Wow, look at that size difference. Next up in size, let's go with the Jurassic World Dominion Ankylosaurus figure. This figure features the clay red and brown coloring. It's got tons of spikes all over its body, and it has the tail that controls the head and the chomping action too. Let's set the Ankylosaurus down next in line. Oh, those are pretty close in size. Next up, let's go with the Pentaceratops figure. This dinosaur has one of the largest frills that I've seen out of any dinosaur. Plus, it's got horns all along its frill and on its face too. And it has two action buttons, one to move the head up and down, and one to move the torso side to side. All right, let's set this down next to the Ankylosaurus. Next up in size, I think we gotta go with the Stegosaurus figures here. This first one has brown, it's got green, it's got the clay red coloring, and like all the other Stegosaurus figures, it has a tail swinging attack button. Let's set down this first Stegosaurus next to the Pentaceratops. And I think all these Stegosauruses are going to be pretty similar in size, so let's just go with this one next. It's got the blue-gray coloring with the darker coloring along the top, and the pink underbelly, and of course the swinging tail attack. Let's get this Stegosaurus down next in line. This next one is brighter in color. It's almost a teal green color. It's still got a lighter underbelly, and it has some cool highlights right along its spine. This one will be our third Stegosaurus in line. And our fourth and final Stegosaurus of this collection is this gigantic Trackers Stegosaurus. And this is actually a very new figure. It's got some really cool coloring all over its body. Plus it comes with this crazy looking Dino Tracker backpack. Let's set it down as our fourth Stegosaurus. Next in size, I think, is this Diabloceratops figure. Check out these super huge horns on the top of its head and on the front of its face too. It's got a fiery red color over most of its body and a light tan underbelly. Plus there's an action button to swing its head back and forth. Let's put this down next in size. Up next, let's go with this Spinosaurus in the light gray blue with the tan detailing. And check out those super dark black eyes. That's pretty crazy looking. Let's put this one down next in line, and you can use the tail to move ahead too. I've got another Spinosaurus figure right here that is probably the exact same in size, but it's got different coloring. This one is the green with the tan detailing, and this one has some bright yellow eyes. So let's set this one down too, and look at that. This one also controls the head by moving the tail. It looks like we've got a few Triceratops figures up next. This first one has the dark brown with the two tones of blue along its back, and just like these Spinosaurus figures, you can use the tail to control the head. Let's go ahead and grab this next Triceratops figure with the gray and darker gray detailing along the top. But with this figure, instead of the tail that controls the head, there are two action buttons on its back. One controls the head for roaring, and the other controls its tail for swinging back and forth. Now let's set this down next in line as the second Triceratops. And this next Triceratops has some green coloring with brown along its frill and along its back too. And this Triceratops has an even different action. When you press down on its body, it does a roar, and it has sound effects too. Oh, you know what? I think there's another Triceratops here that I didn't even notice. This one has the clay red coloring with the brown detailing along the top and on the frill. And this one has one single action button on its back for the roaring action. This next quadrupedal dinosaur is a Kentrosaurus. It's got the spines running all along its back and these ginormous spikes coming right out of its sides. And this one has a pretty cool action that when you slide this back, it swings its torso back and forth to stab with those huge spikes. Now this dinosaur might be a little taller with its spines compared to the Triceratops, but we're gonna place it right here anyways. For the next up in size, we're gonna go with this dinosaur. This is the Edmontosaurus. Its front legs are smaller compared to its back legs. It's got some pretty cool coloring on its face and on that crown on the top of its head. And like many of these other cool figures that we've seen, you can use the tail to control the head. And it has sound effects too. Next, we're gonna go with this Iguanodon figure from Jurassic World Dominion. It's mostly tan, it's got some brown striping with the lighter streaks on the top. And with this figure, when you press down on its back, it has a chomping action. All right, next, let's go with this crazy looking dinosaur. This is a Sarcosuchus. It's got a long and narrow snout with tons of teeth. And the coolest part is that you can use the tail to control the head. The next dinosaur that we're gonna choose is this Ankylosaurus figure right here. This one is clay red, it's got some brown, and its spikes are a lighter color. And I think this one was from Jurassic World Dominion because when you press down on its back, it swings its tail back and forth. Let's go ahead and grab this next Ankylosaurus for our next in size. This one is a really old figure from Jurassic World. I think this one is from the first movie. And check out the size difference between the two. Next up, we've got two baby Brachiosaurus figures right here. And they each have their own unique color. This first one's gray, it's got some dark brown purple coloring along the top. And this other one is a much brighter color. It's a bright green with dark green right along the top. So let's set these down right next to the Ankylosauruses. Next in size, let's see, I think it might be this dinosaur, which I believe is called a Styracosaurus. It's got some super bright coloring along the front of its frill, which is really interesting, and it has some darker detailing along its back. Now let's set this down right next to the baby Brachiosauruses. I think next we're gonna go with this Miragaia figure from Jurassic World Dominion. Like the Kentrosaurus, this one also has some huge spikes sticking right out of its sides. Now let's set it down right next to the Styracosaurus. Next, why don't we go with this dinosaur? This is the Chialingosaurus. It looks somewhat similar to a Stegosaurus because it's got those spines in the top, but the spikes in the very back are quite a bit different, and it has these tiny little spikes coming out of its front legs. And let's set this one down next in line. Next, let's go with this crazy looking dinosaur. This is the Shringosaurus, and it's got a huge and very long neck. It's got those two evil looking horns on the top of its head too. Very wild looking. Let's put this next in line. For the next in size, why don't we go with this one? This is a Calavosaurus. It's got a dark blue body with some orange detailing. It's got some light blue stripes along its tail and on its mouth as well. And it looks like we're running out of space at the edge of the table, so we're gonna start a new line right in front. For our next in size, let's go with this baby Triceratops figure with extreme battle damage right on the side. And let's put this one down right next to the Calavosaurus. This next dinosaur, I believe, is called a Zuniceratops. It's got a pretty bright body, and it's got two horns on the front of its head. So let's set this down right next to the baby Triceratops. They look pretty similar. For our next one, why don't we go with this baby Stegosaurus figure? And you may notice that this baby Stegosaurus came as part of a set with this huge Stegosaurus right here. You can see that they're very similar in color. So let's set this down next in size, next to the Zuniceratops. And next we'll go with these two Dimetrodon figures. This first one is the older figure of the two, and this figure has an action that when you move its tail, it chomps its jaw open and closed. So we're gonna put that right there. And this other Dimetrodon figure is from Jurassic World Dominion, so it's pretty new. And it's got a much brighter spine, although it does not have any action buttons. So we're gonna set it down right next to the other one. Next up, it looks like we've got a Sauropelta figure. This is a pretty small figure, but it has some huge spikes on its back in comparison. It's really cool. So let's set this one down next in line. Here we have a small dinosaur. This is a Mosasaurus. It's got blue with some black detailing along the top and the yellow underbelly. And we'll set this down right here. And finally, we have two Minmi figures. This first one right over here is mostly green in color. Its spikes are more of a yellow color, but it has a ton of spikes along its back for protection. And this second Minmi figure right here is red in color, and its spikes are a bright white in contrast. But other than that, it is pretty identical to the other Minmi figure. Let's check out the first theropod. This is the 93 real field T-Rex figure that came out really recently. It's got the rubbery skin and the stomach compartment so you can actually feed this T-Rex smaller dinosaurs. Our first sauropod, I believe, is a Brachiosaurus figure. This figure comes in the dark green, it has some red detailing along the top and the lighter underbelly, and of course the super long neck with the smaller head in the front. Our next theropod is the Camp Cretaceous Epic Roarin' T-Rex. It comes in the light brown coloring with the darker brown along the top and the tail that controls the head and the chomping. Our next sauropod, I believe, is another Brachiosaurus. This one has much more interesting detailing along its body. You can see all the different muscles and the bones as well. And it comes in this darker green coloring. There's also some darker detailing throughout. And at the top of its head, it's got some dark orange eyes. Our next theropod is this special Spinosaurus figure. This figure is from Jurassic World, but it actually has custom coloring over its entire body, so you won't see this coloring anywhere else. Plus, it's got the button on its head for the chomping action too. For the next sauropod is the Nigersaurus figure from Jurassic World. This one is part of the new Dino Tracker series. It has two tones of green, the bright green in the front and the darker green in the back, and a slide lever action on its back for the sound effects and movement. This next theropod is another T-Rex. This one's pretty special because it comes in a dark green coloring with the black accenting on top, which is pretty unusual for the Jurassic World figures. And its entire body is posable, and of course you can chomp the jaw with the button at the top of its head. Next up is a strange looking sauropod. I'm actually not sure what type of sauropod this is, so let me know in the comments if you recognize the species. But it has some amazing coloring with the green, purple, blue, red, and these interesting spikes along its neck. Now let's check out this one that I just bought, and let's see what it is. All right, this is a theropod, and it is the battle damage Spinosaurus. This one was actually really hard to find, so let's open it up and check it out. I am super excited to finally have this to add to my collection. This is the first blue and yellow Spinosaurus figure that I have. In terms of its shape and its size, it's pretty similar to the Legacy collection and the Camp Cretaceous version. But for the best part, let's check out the battle damage right here on the side. That is so cool. That is ginormous. And then you can also even open up its ribs to reveal what's underneath right here. And there's a hidden button right here on its spine that make its insides spin. Now that is pretty awesome. Let's do another theropod. This is a custom colored T-Rex figure. This one's pretty special because it looks like a fire T-Rex. And I think it definitely looks scarier than most of the other T-Rex figures. This next sauropod figure is an Allosaurus, and this one was for Jurassic World Dominion. It's got a bunch of interesting little spikes all over its body, and you can use the tail to move the head around and open and close its mouth. This theropod is called the Suchomimus figure. This version is in the dark blue with the yellow accenting and one action button on its back to chomp the jaw. This other theropod figure is the Therizinosaurus figure from Jurassic World Dominion. It's a pretty big figure, and it has feathered texturing all over its body, and the best part are these huge claws on its hands. This next figure here might be a Diplodocus figure, I'm actually not sure, but it has some cool coloring, the brown stripes on the back, the gray on the sides, tan underbelly, and it has some pretty decent detailing too. They even colored in the eyes. This theropod figure is the Jurassic World Carcharodontosaurus. This version of this dinosaur has the tan body with the brown and orange accenting along the top, and all these little spikes running along its back, and a single action button for chomping. Now here's a pretty special one. This is the Lego edition Brachiosaurus figure. I think these figures are pretty rare and hard to find nowadays, so I'm pretty happy to have one in my collection. This theropod is the Seats Microrarum figure from Jurassic World. It's colored in the orange, the tan, and the dark blue. It's got a ton of rows of spikes running along its head and its back. And it has the action that when you move its tail, it also moves its head and controls its jaw. This sauropod is called the Amargosaurus. It has the dark brown coloring with the darker accenting and a little bit of red along its spines. And check out, there's actually 2 rows of spines along its neck that form into one spine running down its body. And this figure has 2 action buttons. The first button moves its head up and down, and the second action swings its tail back and forth. This theropod is the Allosaurus figure. This version is in the dark green and it has the white and red accenting. It's got a short row of spines right on the top of its neck. And this figure has the slide lever action for a bunch of sound effects and roar poses. This next sauropod kind of looks like a Brachiosaurus figure to me, and I think this is the only one that I have that is red colored. And sadly, you can't move any of its limbs or its tail or anything like that, but I do appreciate the detail and texturing along its body. This sauropod is another Allosaurus figure, but this one is in the gray with the yellow accenting. It also has posable arms and legs and a single action button on its back for chomping. Here's the second Suchomimus figure of this sauropod versus theropod collection. This second version has the bright yellow body with the brown accenting along the top, and this Suchomimus features two action buttons, one for chomping and the other for swinging its tail. Man, do I have a lot of Brachiosaurus figures. This one is also a Brachiosaurus. It's got some interesting orange spotting all over its body, and it's quite a bit smaller than many of the other figures so far. This next theropod is another T-Rex figure. This one is from the first Jurassic World movie, and it's actually a pretty special one. It's got some interesting coloring, patterning along its side, and it actually has hidden spikes that pop out when you press a button. Over here, I've got an Irritator figure from Jurassic World. This is an older version that features the brown sides with the two tones of blue along its spine. And this feature comes with sound effects and a tail that controls the head. I've also got some Baryonyx figures in here, like this dark green one with the brown coloring along the top and the single action button on its back for chomping. This next figure is a basic Velociraptor figure from Jurassic World. And this one is actually Velociraptor Blue. And since it's a basic figure, you can only move the arms and the legs and the tail, but there's no action button. Up next is my first baby Brachiosaurus figure. This one is in the gray with purple coloring along the top. And even though it's so small, you can still open and close the mouth. This giant figure in here is my Camp Cretaceous Spinosaurus figure. Compared to the battle damaged version that we saw earlier, this one has the tan body with the brown along the top, and then the red spine and the red face. This next theropod is a Monolophosaurus figure, and is a pretty small figure, but it has the dark blue coloring with the I think that's kind of a brown accenting along the top of its body. And with this figure too, you can open and close its mouth as well as move its arms and its legs and twist the tail too. Here's my next baby Brachiosaurus figure. This one is a bit more recent and it comes in the brown coloring with a little bit of tan accenting along the side. The next theropod is actually a Pyroraptor, which is very similar to a raptor, but you can see that it has feather texturing all over its body here, and it has these really cool accent feathers right behind its head too. And here is my third juvenile Brachiosaurus figure. This one is the light green version with the dark green along the top, and of course the fully posable arms, tail, neck, and mouth. And here's the final theropod. This is an Atrociraptor figure. This version is the bright orange with the tan accenting along its body. Finally, we have these two huge sauropod figures. This first one on the right is a giant Brachiosaurus figure. It's much larger than this one over here. And this Brachiosaurus is actually an older version. There is a Jurassic World Dominion figure that's come out more recently. And this figure here is the Apatosaurus figure from Jurassic World Dominion. It's smaller compared to the Brachiosaurus, but still a giant compared to many of the other figures. We're gonna start with the biggest figures over here. I think the largest one is this Jurassic World Dominion Brachiosaurus figure. This Dominion version has an updated paint design on its back and on its neck, and the reflective blue on its head. And since it's the biggest, we're gonna place this on the furthest left and go for the next biggest, which I think is this giant Dreadnoughtus figure. Now this figure is seriously ridiculously long. It's probably maybe even 4 feet long from the tip of its head all the way to the tail, and has a pretty cool blue and orange paint design too. So let's grab this and put this next in line as the next largest dinosaur right here. And we're gonna grab the next giant figure, which is a Jurassic World Apatosaurus figure. Now this figure is still pretty long compared to a lot of these smaller figures, but compared to the Dreadnoughtus figure right next to it, see how much longer its neck is? It is definitely a whole lot smaller. Now that we've got the three biggest set up, let's go for the next biggest one, which I think is this Brachiosaurus figure right here. This figure is a whole lot smaller than these giant ones right here, but it's still a pretty good size. It's probably a foot tall. It has some really cool coloring and texturing too. So let's set this next in line as the next largest quadrupedal dinosaur and move on to the next one, which I think is this dinosaur right here. This is an Amargosaurus dinosaur from Jurassic World. It's pretty unique because it has these two giant frills going down all the way from its neck to its tail. And it has two action buttons. One swings its neck up and down, and the second swings its tail back and forth. We've got a lot of long-necked quadrupedal dinosaurs in here so far. The next in size, I think, might be this one, and this is a brand new one that I bought. This is the Jurassic Park 30th Anniversary Cretaceous figure. And here it is out of the box, and it is quite a sizable figure. This, of course, is from the Hammond collection. I don't know that I have another Cretaceous figure in my collection, so this is pretty neat. It's got some yellow, gray, black, and it's got a real big crown on the top of its head. And of course, it is very adjustable, as many of the Hammond collection figures are. So let's get this next in line. The next quadrupedal dinosaur for this collection is this gray and blue Stegosaurus figure. This is a classic figure made by Mattel for Jurassic World, and it's got a single hidden action button on its back to swing the tail back and forth. And we'll set it down next in line. For the next one, we're gonna go with another Stegosaurus figure. This Jurassic World figure looks pretty identical in shape and size to this gray-blue Stegosaurus, but of course it has totally different coloring, and it has a totally different action button as well. You can press on these two spines right here, and it'll swing its entire torso back and forth. That's pretty cool, and I do think I like it better than the action button on this one. Next up, I've got a vintage figure from Jurassic Park. This is the Triceratops figure, numbered JP08. And like many of the figures from the Jurassic Park era, it has the real feel skin, so instead of a hard plastic, like many of the new Jurassic World figures, it has a soft, rubbery skin over almost its entire body. And when you press down on the stomach, it actually has an action where it lifts up its head too. Now let's set it down next in size. I think it's just a little bit shorter than the Stegosaurus figures. For the next quadrupedal dinosaur, we're gonna go with the Diabloceratops figure from the Dino Trackers collection. This cool dinosaur has a fiery red color over its whole body with some tan underneath. And the coolest part are these 4 gigantic horns on the front of its head. And there's an action button for the sound effects and attack button. Now let's set it down next in line, next to the Jurassic Park Triceratops figure. Look at that size difference. Looks like there's some Triceratops figures in this collection, and these are probably one of the most popular quadrupedal dinosaurs. This Triceratops figure comes in the gray coloring with a little bit of dark detailing along the top, and has 2 action buttons, one for the head and one for the tail. And let's put that right next to the Diabloceratops. This next Triceratops figure is actually one that I custom painted myself. It also has a mostly gray color with a bit of gray detailing along the top of its body, but one of my favorite parts are the red coloring along its frill and its bright green eyes too. And overall, I'm really happy with the job that I did on painting this dinosaur. And here's one more Triceratops figure for this quadrupedal collection. This one is a dark green color. It has some brown detailing along the top and an attack feature that when you press down on its back, it lifts up its head. Let's keep on going with these 4-legged dinosaurs. This next one is another new figure from the Dino Trackers series. This is the Nigersaurus, and it has mostly green coloring over its whole body and an action button on its back to swing the neck back and forth. And I think I actually got to bump this up in line because it's a little bit taller than many of these Triceratops figures. So we're going to put it right here. Next up is another vintage figure. This is the Jurassic Park Amargospinus figure, which I believe is actually a hybrid dinosaur. This figure has some of the brightest coloring that I've seen, and it has a pretty cool feature. When you move the leg on this figure, it actually lifts up the spikes on its back, the spikes on its neck, and it opens its mouth too. And although the head of the Amargospinus is a bit taller than the Triceratops, its body is a little bit shorter, so we're gonna put it next in line. Next up is another vintage figure from Jurassic Park. This one, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was called the Chasmosaurus or something like that. It looks quite a bit like a Triceratops. It has the huge frill in the front and some horns on its head too. And like the Amargospinus we saw, if you move the leg on this figure, it lifts its head up for a similar attack action. And check it out, the sound effects still work on this super old figure. Now let's set that up next in line here. For the next figure, I think we'll go with this smaller Parasaurolophus figure. This figure is from Jurassic World Dominion, so it's a newer figure, and it has some bright blue and orange accenting on the top of its body. So let's set that down right here. And now I think it's time to open this huge Jurassic Park 93 Classic Track and Explore vehicle set. Alright, now let's check out this new set. We'll first check out the car. You can open and close the doors. It has this protector for the windshield right here that you can bring down so nothing breaks the glass when you're hunting dinosaurs. It also has a turret coming out of the back of the truck. And I don't think I've seen this color design before. It's got the soft blue coloring with the yellow on the bottom, but it still has the Jurassic Park logo right on the side. And it also comes with this little lasso for hunting dinosaurs. And here is the dinosaur that comes in the set. This is the, I think it's pronounced Scutosaurus or Scutosaurus. It's a bright orange dinosaur. It looks pretty bulky. It has a huge torso. Its two front legs are white and the two back are orange like the rest of its body. And it looks like it doesn't have any action buttons, but you can adjust the neck and the head, and you can move the legs around too. So let's get all of this next in line. For the next biggest, we're gonna go with this figure from the Dino Trackers series. This is the Gigant Spinosaurus. This figure has some similar orange coloring to the figure that we just saw, and its back is a tan color. But the coolest part are these huge spikes that it's got coming out of its shoulders, and then all the spines running down to its tail. Now let's put that next in line and grab our next dinosaur. Now let's grab this big old Sarcosuchus figure. Now this is another special figure to me because I custom painted this one as well. So originally I think it came in a purple and gray coloring, but I changed it to this camo green with the brown on top and some brighter green along the bottom too. And I think it looks pretty awesome. Next, I'm gonna grab this Ankylosaurus figure right here in the blue and yellow coloring. This is a pretty large Ankylosaurus figure, and I really love the spikes that come off the sides. Plus, there is an action button on its back for swinging its tail. Now I think next I'm gonna grab this other Ankylosaurus figure. This one is actually from the first Jurassic World movie, so this one is made by Hasbro as opposed to Mattel for many of these other figures. But it has an attack that when you move its leg, it swings its tail, and it can move its head back and forth too. Now let's set that right there, and let's grab our next one, which I think could be this one right here. I believe this dinosaur is called the Styracosaurus. And this one has some pretty cool coloring right on its frill, bright yellow and orange. It's got a ton of spikes all over. And all in all, it's a pretty cool figure. Pretty similar to that one is this Dino Trackers Zuniceratops figure. It too has a large frill in the front, and it's got some horns, although not anywhere near as many. But it does have an action button on its back to lift up its head for stabbing and attacking. So let's put that next in size. Next up is another new figure. This is the Jurassic World Dominion Nasutoceratops figure. Now let's go ahead and open it up and check it out. Now this, I believe, is the juvenile version. I do have the adult version if you've checked out my other videos. And this little figure has some little horns coming out of its head and dark coloring around its body overall. And we're gonna put that right next to the Zuniceratops. Now let's grab our second to last figure. This is a baby Ankylosaurus figure with very similar coloring as the adult figure right over here. It's got the blue and the yellow underbelly. And this figure specifically is actually Ankylosaurus Bumpy. We're gonna put it right there. And for our final figure, this weird looking dinosaur is the Nothosaurus dinosaur. As you can see, its body stays really close to the ground, although it's technically standing on all four legs. It has this really long neck and a long and narrow snout with a bunch of nasty looking teeth. Now let's put that on the very end of the line as our final and smallest dinosaur. The first and largest figure is this super colossal Carnotaurus Toro figure. It has the dark orange body with the brown coloring on top, tons of little spikes, and the huge horns on its head. Next up in size is this super colossal Velociraptor blue figure. This figure features the classic blue stripe down the side, and it has fully posable arms, legs, and a jaw too. Next up in size is another Velociraptor blue figure, but this one is a bit different. This figure is battery operated, so let's see what happens when we turn it on. That is pretty cool. It blinks and its eyes move, and it even has sound effects. Moving on to the next in size, let's go with this custom colored Spinosaurus figure. This figure features way more intricate and cool coloring than the original Mattel figure featured. It features posable arms, legs, and a tail, and even the neck and the jaw. Let's set this figure down next to the robotic Velociraptor blue figure. Next up, why don't we go with this Terran T-Rex figure. This T-Rex has some of the classic brown and tan coloring, and best of all, it features an awesome tearing feature when you press the button on its back. Look at that jaw-chomping action. And we're gonna set this down as the next biggest dinosaur in this carnivore collection. Over here is another Terran T-Rex, but this one was actually custom colored. Let's set them down side by side so we can see the color differences. This one is a lot darker, and it actually has a lot more battle damage painted all over its body. And look at that, even some more battle damage on the other side. That is really cool. Let's set this down next in line. For the next in size, we're gonna go with this camouflage T-Rex figure. This is one of my favorite custom colored dinosaurs because of this really cool green camo color that has all over its body. And this figure has a chomping action when you move its tail, and a roaring action too. This figure is super cool, so let's set this as the next biggest dinosaur. For the next biggest carnivore figure, we're gonna go with this Camp Cretaceous Epic Roarin' T-Rex. This figure has the classic tan body, and it features a button on its tail for a roaring and chomping action. This one is definitely cool, so let's set this down next in size. Looks like we've got a few more T-Rex figures in here. Here is another green T-Rex, but this one isn't custom colored. This is actually how it came. It's got some black detailing along the top of its head, and it has a button on the top of its head for the chomping and roaring action. Plus, its arms and legs and tail and neck are fully posable, just like many of these other T-Rex figures. All right, here might be one of my last T-Rex figures in this carnivore collection. This one is the classic bright orange, and it features opposable arms, legs, tail, neck, and jaw too. Why don't we dig into this one next? This is part of the new Epic Attack series from Jurassic World. This is the battle-chomping Carnotaurus. And here it is. It looks like it has 3 different action buttons on this Carnotaurus figure. The first 2 are light and sound effect buttons that you can push for different sounds. So depending on how many times you press these buttons, it has different sound effects. And the third button is a classic chomping action button. The color and texturing design is pretty similar to the older Carnotaurus figures. It's mostly that clay red orange color. It has some brown detailing throughout, and of course it's got the bright yellow eyes. Overall, this figure is pretty cool. I love the fact that there are different sound effects and different battle damage buttons. All right, let's set this next in line as the next largest carnivore figure. Over here, we've got the Scorpius Rex figure from Camp Cretaceous. And it has 2 action buttons on its back. The first operates the jaw with the sound effects. And the second button on its back activates the claws for a slashing action. That is pretty cool, and it is quite a large figure. And it is the next in size. For our next one, let's grab this classic Indoraptor figure. This is the Grab and Growl Indoraptor, and it is pretty hard to find online nowadays. I don't think they're making this one anymore. It's got 1 button on the top of its tail for the claw slashing action, and another button on the bottom of its tail for a jaw chomping action. All right, this figure is pretty awesome, so let's set this next in line as the next biggest. Over here, I've got another Carnotaurus figure, but this one is quite a bit older. I think this one came out for the second Jurassic World movie, which was Fallen Kingdom. As you can see, they're a slightly different red color, and this figure is a little bit smaller than that one as well. But it still has 1 button on its back for the chomping action. Very cool. All right, let's set this down. This next figure is really long, but it's actually a little bit shorter than the Carnotaurus figure, which is why it's next in line. This, I believe, was called the Ocean Protector Mosasaurus figure. You can move all of its fins, and its jaw opens and closes too. All right, let's keep going. Let's go with this Jurassic Park juvenile T-Rex figure. This figure is quite old. You can see the JP tattoo on its leg. It's got some battle damage on its side as well. Let's set this one down next in line. For the next figure, why don't we go with another old figure? This is from Jurassic Park 3, and I believe this dinosaur is a Velociraptor. And it used to be battery operated, but sadly it doesn't work anymore. But it's still a really cool figure, so let's set this down next to the T-Rex. Up next for scary carnivores, we've got a Suchomimus figure. This version is the dark blue with the yellow spine, and it has 1 button on its back for the chomping action. And let's set this down next in line right here. For the next in size, let's see, I think we should go with the Sound Surge dinosaurs. This first one is the Giganotosaurus Sound Surge. Let's check out those sound effects. Very cool. Let's set this down next to the Suchomimus. The other Sound Surge dinosaur in this carnivore collection is the Sound Surge Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now let's hear the sound effects for this figure. And we're gonna set it down right next to the Sound Surge Giganotosaurus. Next up is this Rowdy Roars Carnotaurus figure. It is the classic clay red and orange coloring with the brown on top. It's got a little battle damage on its nose too. Compared to the Epic Attack figure, this one is a whole lot smaller and is a little bit brighter, and of course has much larger eyes. All right, let's set this down next to the T-Rex. The next in size is this Cryolophosaurus figure. This version has the dark blue body with the white and orange on the top. And this figure comes with sound effects, and when you move the tail, it controls the head. All right, let's set this down next to the Carnotaurus. Up next, we've got a Baryonyx figure. I think this one might be a Camp Cretaceous Baryonyx. And it's got the slide lever action on its back for different roars and sound effects. So let's set this up next in line. I've also got a custom Hammond Collection Spinosaurus figure. It has the red running along its back and on its face, and it's got the blue, brown, and red spine, which is actually pretty similar to this other custom colored Spinosaurus figure that I have in the front. So we're gonna set this one down next in line. Over here is the Hammond Collection Baryonyx figure. It's got pretty similar coloring as this Camp Cretaceous Baryonyx figure right here. It's even got a little bit of that reflective blue coloring on its face. And let's set this one down right at the very end right here. Next up is not a dinosaur, but is actually an Owen figure from Jurassic World. This figure has the classic brown vest with the blue shirt underneath. And we're running out of room at the end of the table, so I'm gonna start a new line right up here in front. For the next in size is this Dilophosaurus figure. I believe this Dilophosaurus came out for the first Jurassic World movie and is not made by Mattel, but actually I think it's made by Hasbro. And it even has an action that when you press down on its tail, it moves its neck up and down. Let's go ahead and grab this little Velociraptor blue figure. Now this figure is actually motorized, so when you press the top of its head, it comes with sound effects and chomping motions. And now we finally get to open this other new figure. This is the Epic Attack Dilophosaurus figure. Now it looks like this Dilophosaurus figure has one button on its side, and it looks like it is for the sound effects and light. And I think it actually comes with a few different sound effects too. Let's press it again. That's pretty cool. It's like a strobing light when you press it. It looks like its legs and arms are posable, and you can open and close its mouth manually, but sadly you can't move the frills at all, so you can't bring them forward, which is a bit of a bummer if you ask me, but it is a pretty cool design. So let's set this Dilophosaurus down next to Velociraptor Blue. All right, we've only got a few small figures left. I've got two Atrociraptor figures right here. This first Atrociraptor is in the classic white and tan coloring, and this other Atrociraptor figure that I bought more recently is brighter colored. It's got some red on its arms, its neck, and its chin. And we're gonna set these two up next in line. Over here, I've got another Dilophosaurus figure, quite a bit smaller. They're both green and they have some yellow, orange, and red detailing along their frills. But this figure is actually pretty cool because you can press on the tail to activate its frills. That is really cool. Up next is another Velociraptor figure, but this is a slashing Velociraptor. That means that its torso is actually spring-loaded, so you can swing it side to side for a slashing action. And let's put this one right here. I've got another raptor over here. This one is a Pyroraptor figure from Jurassic World Dominion. It's got the feathers all over its body and the especially large feathers on the top of its head. And let's set this raptor down next in line. And now we're on to the really small figures over here. First up is a Baryonyx with the dark brown and blue coloring. And you can open and close its jaw too. Next up is a stalking Endoraptor figure with the gold stripe running down its side. Up next is a teeny tiny Mosasaurus figure. Look how small it is in comparison to this giant figure right there. But you can still open and close its mouth, which is pretty cool. And finally, I've got a tiny Pteranodon figure with some brown detailing on its wings, on its back, and on its horn. Now, starting with one of the largest herbivore figures that I have is this new Jurassic World Dominion Brachiosaurus figure. Now, Mattel did have an older Brachiosaurus figure, but this is the Jurassic World Dominion one, so it has some new painting on top of its head as well as on its back. So let's put this huge herbivore as the tallest in this collection. The next up in size is a dinosaur that looks pretty similar to the Brachiosaurus. And this figure is also from Jurassic World Dominion. This is an Apatosaurus. Compared to the Brachiosaurus, you can see that it's a little bit smaller and its neck is a lot shorter than the Brachiosaurus, but it is still the next in size. All right, what's next? Let's see what we got here. Let's go with the Stegosaurus. This is the green, tan, and brown version. And it has this attack button to swing its tail and back torso back and forth. This figure is a lot smaller, but it is next in size compared to the Apatosaurus. Right over here is the Pentaceratops herbivore figure. This dinosaur has 3 big horns on its head and a huge frill, much larger compared to a Triceratops, I think. And it has 2 action buttons, one for swinging the head up and down, and one for spinning the torso back and forth. And let's put it right there next to the Stegosaurus. Next, we're gonna go with this long-necked dinosaur. It kind of looks like an Apatosaurus. Well, I'm not sure. It might actually be a Brachiosaurus. What do you think? But either way, it is next in size. So let's put it next to the Pentaceratops. Up next is this Parasaurolophus from the Hammond collection. It's got the light tan body with the orange and purple and white striping along its back, and like all Hammond collection figures, is very posable. Now let's set it next in line. I've got another Parasaurolophus over here in this collection. This is actually a Jurassic Park Parasaurolophus. Standing them side by side, you can see the similarities. Both of them have that purple striping, but the Hammond collection has the orange on its back. And this one is a lot lighter colored. And it looks like this Parasaurolophus actually stands a bit taller, so let's go ahead and switch places. Let's go ahead and grab these Triceratops now. This is a dark brown version with the blue spotting on the top of its body. And this Triceratops has a feature that when you move its tail, it moves its head around with sound effects. All right, let's put that in next in size. Here's this next Triceratops figure, but this one is in a camo green color with the brown detailing on the top and on its frill too. Now on this figure, the tail does not control the head, but you can press down on the body for some sound effects and a striking action. Let's put that down right next to the other Triceratops. Here's a similar dinosaur. This is a Sinoceratops. It's got a green body similar to the previous Triceratops, but it does not have any huge horns coming out of its head other than these little ones right here and then these ones on the top. And this figure has a single action button for the roaring and striking attack. Now it's time for one of my new figures. It's this one in this box that I bought off of eBay. It is a custom colored Sinoceratops. Now check that out. That has some pretty different coloring. Let's place them side by side so we can see the difference here. This one's got some bright purple, where the other has some orange on it. Also, its entire body is now a brown color with some tan all over. And it has these black patches on its back compared to the tan striping on the original. That is pretty cool. Which coloring do you like more? Let me know in the comments, the original or the custom painted. Now let's grab this dinosaur with spikes all over it. This, I believe, is a Kentrosaurus. It looks pretty similar to a Stegosaurus because it's got all these spines running along its back, but it also has these huge spikes coming out of its shoulders, and it's got a ton more spikes in the back here. Plus, there is a slide lever action for swinging those huge spikes back and forth. And you know what? I think this one is actually a little bit bigger than the rest of these, so let's move it up in line. Next up, I've got a Triceratops looking dinosaur, but I don't think this is actually a Triceratops. You can see it's got the 3 horns in the front, but it also has all these horns in the back. It might be a Styracosaurus or something like that, but let me know in the comments if you know what type this is. All right, time for another new figure. This is the Dino Tracker's Nigersaurus. And here it is out of the box. This is another herbivore that has a very long neck and stands on 4 legs. It looks like it has 2 different tones of green, the bright green here, and then the dark green along the back half of its body. It's got pretty typical texturing and detailing. You can see some little horns there, and then the scaly skin texture over most of its body. And it looks like, actually, in its mouth, it's not painted, which is kind of a disappointment. But on its back, it still has this swivel action button for different sound effects and movements. That's pretty cool. It's definitely a unique looking dinosaur. So now let's put it next in line. Next up, looks like we've got another Parasaurolophus, but this one's quite a bit different looking. It has a tan and black body, but the coolest part is it's got this white all over its face and then the bright red horn on the top of its head. And it's got a single action button on its back to move its head. So let's set that down next in size. Here's another super old figure. This, I believe, is called a Chasmosaurus. This is actually from Jurassic Park. So it looks pretty similar to a Triceratops, but it has 3 small horns on its head and a much larger frill. And this figure has an attack button when you move its leg. And there we go. Next, let's go with another brand new figure. This is the Dino Tracker's Gigant Spinosaurus figure. Here it is unboxed. It is a pretty bright dinosaur. It's got the bright orange on the front and the tan in the back. It kind of looks like a sauropelta with these huge spikes coming out of its shoulders. And it's got pretty typical texturing as well. You can see all those bumps along its skin, but there's not too much going on with the coloring. It basically looks like there are just three main colors: the green in the back, the white for its horns and spines, and then the orange in the front. But this figure does have an attack that when you move its head back and forth, it actually swings its tail back and forth a little bit. All right, let's set this down next in size. Next, we're gonna go with this Allosaurus figure right here. This one is in the brown with tan stripes and the red bottom. It features an attack button when you press down on its body. It moves its tail, and it has posable legs and a head too. So let's set this down next in size. And I think this actually might be a little larger than this one. So we're going to have them switch places. Next up, we're going with another vintage figure. This is the Jurassic Park baby Triceratops figure. It's got the camo green body with some darker coloring along the top, and when you move the leg, it has a striking action. Next, we're gonna go with this figure. This, I believe, is the Styracosaurus. It's got a ton of horns along its frill, and it's got a very natural green and brown coloring with some brighter coloring in the front. And it has an attack that when you move its tail, it swings its head up and down. All right, let's put that next in line. Here is a smaller Brachiosaurus figure, smaller than the huge one that we saw at the beginning. It's got the mostly brown body with these orange spots all over. Looks like it has some darker detailing along the top of its back, and it actually looks like it's standing a little bit taller than some of these other figures, so we're gonna push it up to the front over here. Next, we're actually gonna go with another Brachiosaurus figure, but this is a new figure from the Dino Trackers series. So let's open it up. So this baby Brachiosaurus looks pretty similar to older figures of baby Brachiosauruses that I have, but it just has totally new coloring. This one is in the all brown coloring with some tan detailing along its back and a little bit of tan detailing right along its face. And it features a posable jaw, neck, and legs. Next, we're gonna go with this herbivore that stands on two legs. This is a Gallimimus figure, and it comes in the tan with dark brown coloring along the top. So we're gonna set this figure here next in line, and we actually have another Gallimimus figure right here in this collection. This one has slightly darker coloring. It's almost orange, and it has a darker brown striping along the top. But other than that, they look pretty identical. And next, let's go ahead and open up this other Dino Trackers new figure. This is the Strike Attack Zuniceratops. This dinosaur figure has some pretty naturalistic coloring with the brown and the tan, and then the darker brown along its neck. So it looks very realistic. And it looks like its legs and its arms are posable, and there's an action button on its back to swing its head up and down. Next, let's go with this herbivore. This is another one that stands on two legs. This one is a Dracorex dinosaur, and it has some brighter green coloring with some gray striping along its back and tons of spikes on the top of its head. Then we'll go with this cute looking dinosaur figure right here. This looks like a baby Stygimoloch figure. It has the clay red coloring, some dark brown eyes, a ton of horns on the top of its head, and of course the hard helmet shell on the top of its head for headbutting. And let's put that right next to the Dracorex. Next up is the Allosaurus dinosaur in the dark blue with the yellow detailing along its body. Oh, you know what? I forgot that there was another Zuniceratops figure in here. This one is in the bright green with the darker detailing along the top and on its head. And let's go ahead and put these Zuniceratops next to each other. So we gotta move this over here and put this one right in there. Next up is a four-legged herbivore. I believe this one is called a Shringosaurus. It looks pretty similar to a Stegosaurus, but it has these huge spikes along its back, and its spines look a little bit different than a Stegosaurus. And it has these little horns coming out of its front legs. And since we're almost out of room on this line, we're gonna start a new line in the front right up here. Here is another similar looking dinosaur. I can't remember the name of this one, but it has much darker coloring and these huge horns coming right out of its back. And let's get that in line right there. Next up, I've got a little mini dinosaur. It has these horns all over its body as protective covering, and it is one of the smallest figures I have in this collection. So let's set it next in line. And finally, let's end with this sauropelta figure. It has those bunch of horns coming out of its side, and then the hard protective shell all along the top. And there it is, the smallest in the entire collection. The first and biggest dinosaur in this entire collection is this Hammond collection, Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's got an amazingly detailed body with the coloring as well as the texturing all over. It's got some amazing marbled eyes and a pretty realistic mouth too. We're gonna set that right here as the biggest dinosaur. Next up, also from the Hammond collection, is the Cretaceous dinosaur. Also stands on 2 legs and has some pretty cool yellow coloring with the gray striping and a red crown on the top of its head. And here it goes, next in size. Next up in the collection is the Hammond collection Metriacanthosaurus figure. It has tan coloring with the brown striping and some dark orange along its eyes and at the front of its face too. Now let's go ahead and set that up next in size. Here is the Hammond collection Parasaurolophus figure. It is also mostly tan colored, but it's got some purple striping and orange right along the top, and of course the huge horn on the top of its head. So now let's put this one also in line and grab our next one, which I think is the Ceratosaurus from the Hammond collection. This dinosaur is colored pretty classically for this species. It's got the tan body with the brown striping and then the red along the back all the way up to the face. Now let's put that in line as the next largest one, and let's grab our first Amber collection figure, which is a Velociraptor figure. I believe this is the generic Velociraptor from the Amber collection, so it doesn't have a name, but it has some pretty cool coloring with the bright orange and the brown striping. So now let's go ahead and put this one in line, and let's grab our next Amber collection Velociraptor, and this one does have a name. This one is Velociraptor Charlie. This figure also has some pretty bright coloring. This one is bright green instead, and a little more faded green striping along the top. And it looks like it actually has a headpiece. I think that might be a camera, just like in the movies. So now let's get this one next in line, next to the orange Velociraptor. And here is the next Velociraptor from the Amber collection. This is Velociraptor Delta. And the coloring on this figure is a bit different than the 2 that we've already seen. These 2 ones are more like stripes on its back, but this one has more of like speckles on its back. It does have some striping as well. But this is a really cool blue-green color. So now let's put this Velociraptor in line and grab the next Amber collection Velociraptor, which is this one. And this is Velociraptor Echo. This Velociraptor has probably the most classic coloring out of any of these other Velociraptors, with the brown on the sides and then the black along the top. So now let's put this Velociraptor in line and let's check out the next and one of the coolest Velociraptors. This, of course, is Velociraptor Blue. It has the iconic stripe running down from its tail all the way up to the top of its head, and it has some glowing gold eyes. Now let's set this up in line and grab our next figure, which is actually not a dinosaur, but a human. This is the Amber collection Owen Grady figure. Looks like he's wearing the dark brown vest, blue shirt, and has a pair of jeans on. So now let's put this, very fittingly, right next to Velociraptor Blue. Next, why don't we open up a brand new one? This is the Amber collection John Raymond Arnold figure. And check that out, it looks like it even comes with the torn off arm as well. Let's open it up. First off, here is the John Arnold figure in his lab coat. You can see a Jurassic Park logo right on his shirt, and it looks like it actually comes with a computer set for this figure. So let's check that out. Check that out. This is all one piece, and this is the computer that he was working on in the movie. Looks like there's also a headpiece that you can have for him to put on his head, just like that. And there's an extra pair of hands, and the weirdest part, but the coolest part, is this torn off arm right here. Let's check that out. Now it looks like you can't obviously put it back on the figure because it already has 2 arms, so it's a separate piece. But that's pretty cool. It's a funny little addition to this set. Now let's go ahead and set him up next in line, and let's grab our next Amber collection figure, which is this Dennis Nedry figurine from the first Jurassic World movie. He's wearing a blue lab coat. It's got a blue sweater underneath and the brown pants. So now let's go ahead and set him next in line here. And next up is the famous John Hammond from the Amber collection. And you can see that he's got his classic cane with the mosquito right on the top of it too. Now let's go ahead and set them up in line, and I had to sit these down because sadly they won't stand up on their own on this grass here. But let's grab our next dinosaur, which is this scary looking dinosaur. This is the Hammond Collection Irritator Dinosaur. It's got some really cool yellow striping, and the rest of its body is a brown color, and it's got this dark black color along its face and a bright red crown on the top of its head. And we're gonna go ahead and put that next in line, right next to John Hammond. Next, we're gonna go with the Hammond Collection Spinosaurus. But wait, this isn't actually a Spinosaurus figure. This actually used to be a Hammond Collection Baryonyx. You can see that the spine is actually custom made and put onto the figure, and the rest of the figure was repainted to look like a Spinosaurus. So we're gonna put this one next in line here. And here we go. Here is the Hammond Collection Baryonyx, the normal figure. Over here is the Spinosaurus that was remade from it, and this is the original version. It's got the dark blue coloring with the gray and the white striping, and a little bit of reflective blue coloring right underneath its eye. So now let's go ahead and set this up next in line here. For the next figure, we've got the Hammond Collection Concavinator figure. This has some really amazing coloring with the dark blue along most of its body and the orange on its tail, and a little bit of red on its face. And now, since we're running out of room on this end of the table, we'll start a new line in the front right here for the next biggest dinosaur. Coming right up is the Hammond Collection Triceratops figure. This is pretty classic coloring. You can see that it's mostly brown. It has different shades of brown on different parts of its body. And a really cool part that I like is that it shows a lot of wear and tear on its horns, which I think gives a lot of detail to it. So we're gonna put that next in line, right next to the Concavinator. And here is the Hammond Collection Ankylosaurus figure. This figure is much larger compared to my regular Ankylosaurus figures, and it has some different coloring too. It's like a dark green along the top. It has the tan gray spikes, and then the lighter underbelly as well. And check it out, you can even open and close its mouth. All right, now let's put that right next to the Triceratops figure. Now here is a really cool figure from the Amber Collection. This is a Pteranodon, and now it's actually got rubberized wings, so it's actually pretty flexible along its wings, whereas its body is still the hard plastic. So why don't we go ahead and put this right next to the Ankylosaurus figure. And now we're gonna open up our next new figure set. This is the Amber Collection Dimorphodons. So let's check it out. Now here is the first Dimorphodon. It looks like it is in a standing pose. You can see that its wings are flapped shut, so it's actually walking along the ground. And you can still open and close the mouth and move the neck around and all of its body parts still. And here is the other Dimorphodon. This one is in a open-winged flying pose. It's got some pretty cool shading along its back and along its wings, and you can pose basically every part of its body too. Now let's set these two down next in line. First the standing Dimorphodon, and then the open-winged flying Dimorphodon. Next up is the Hammond Collection Miniature Velociraptor figure. This one has some gray coloring with white striping and then some blue and red along the top of its head. So now let's go ahead and set that up next in line. And next I've got a Dimorphodon figure here. This one's actually pretty recent as well. Now this Dimorphodon figure actually has a removable frill, which unfortunately is a little difficult to take on and off, but it's still a pretty cool feature, and we're gonna put it right next to the Raptor. And to finish it off, I've got some of the miniature figures from the Hammond Collection. First off is the Ellie Sattler figure right here in the red sweater. There's also another Dennis Nedry figure from the Hammond Collection this time. There's the Alan Grant figure in his adventure outfit. And finally, another John Hammond figurine in the same costume.
Want to see more dino videos? Click the subscribe button now.